We talked about this yesterday on the show. We're gonna follow up on it again because it is a big deal. There is an executive order out there that gives the government, whoever's in power, in this case Trump, control over the internet. So there's issues going on with Facebook and Twitter and Google kind of deciding what is and isn't free speech. And that's an issue. Silicon Valley billionaires shouldn't be deciding what is and isn't free speech. These things are commonplace in our lives. They need to be designated as public utilities, and they need to be looked after and forced to follow the free speech laws of the U.S. But instead of seeking that type of solution, what the Trump administration is trying to do is they're just saying, hey, are you worried about overreaching censorship from Silicon Valley? Us too. So why don't you worry about overreaching censorship from us instead? Let's just transfer the authority over to us. It's still authoritarian, but it's us doing it instead of Silicon Valley. Does that sound better? No, it doesn't sound better. It sounds just as bad, if not worse. So here's a refresher on what's going on. The Trump administration drafted an executive order to censor the internet. So CNN obtained a copy of this draft. And what it's doing is Trump's plan attempts to strip certain protections from companies like Facebook and Twitter, particularly those protected under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Now, this is still in its early stages and subject to change. The details that it contains are a paradox that involve fighting censorship with more censorship. So part of the Telecommunications Act in 1996, a horrible bill, by the way, the CDA sought to regulate pornographic material on the internet. Section 230, also known as Title V, was not part of the original bill. It was later added in an attempt to protect service providers from the actions of their users. So Facebook, for example, isn't breaking a law if a user uploads sexual material featuring a minor. It could, however, be in hot water if it was later proven that Facebook knew the piece of content existed and did nothing to remove it. Policing billions of users is all but impossible after all. So Trump's administration sought to strip some of these protections by calling on the FCC to change how the rule is interpreted. As it stands, Trump's plan is for the FCC and the FTC to draft a new interpretation of Section 230 that cracks down on politically biased moderation. The FCC is meant to interpret Section 230 with language declaring anti-competitive, unfair, or deceptive practices violate the definition of good faith outlined in the CDA. Social media networks that remove or suppress content without notifying users are in violation of this agreement. The FTC, on the other hand, is seemingly involved as the agency responsible for collecting consumer complaints when social media networks run afoul of the new interpretation. This, however, opens up an entirely new problem. So here's what's really going on here. Conservatives have alleged for years that social media bias exists and that it's silencing their opinions. There's little in the way of evidence that this type of bias exists. The conservative, all right, blah, 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 blah. So the order titled Protecting Americans from Online Censorship is merely a framework. It's likely to be one of many, and it's doubtful the final version will contain this type of language. But if it comes to be, the order would certainly need to clarify language within. It's unnecessarily broad, downright confusing at times. Any order pushing for political neutrality, however, is sure to raise questions of constitutionality. So basically what they're saying here is, okay, so there's this assumed bias going on some social media sphere. Now the government can just kind of go in and just shut it down. There's no due process. And maybe certain biases like that happen at times. It's very possible. But when you give this authoritarian power to the government to just go in and be like, okay, well, we're just going to quench this. No due process, no questions asked. We just feel like you're biased against us, especially Trump, who just thinks everything's always against him. All social media is against him. All this is against him. You know, it's just transferring authoritarian. It's just transferring overreaching authority. That's all it's doing. It's saying, hey, Silicon Valley can now just censor stuff without any due process. They can just decide what is and isn't free speech. This is concerning. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and just give all that power to the government then. You're complaining that they're doing this? All right, we'll take your word for it. Bam, now they're just gone. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not the solution. Well, you complained about it. They're gone now. You see how this is just a transfer of, so that's what's going on. And here is something you can do, because we are going to follow this daily, because that's how big of an issue this is. The free and open internet is at stake here. And here's what actionnetwork.org has to say about this. And this is from this is a campaign by Fight for the Future. So leaked documents show that the Trump administration is drafting an executive order that, if upheld by the courts, could essentially end free speech on the internet. The draft order would put the FTC and the FCC, headed by Ajit Pai, who is notoriously corrupt, that's an accurate description of what he is, in charge of monitoring, policing online speech on social media platforms, online forums, and more. It would give bureaucratic government agencies unprecedented control over how internet platforms moderate speech by allowing them to revoke the essential protections Congress laid out in Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. CDA 230 is the basic law that makes it possible for online platforms to let users post our own content and to make basic decisions about what kind of contents they as private entities want to host. Every meme, every social media post, every blog, and user-created video on the internet has been made possible by this crucial free speech protection. In practice, this executive order would mean that whichever political party is in power could dictate what speech is allowed on the internet. So basically, they identified a problem. We identified the problem as people of overreaching free speech authority that Silicon Valley has via platforms like Facebook and Google and Twitter. And the government decided, okay, we can go ahead and make that worse. We can give ourselves bureaucratic power to just shut these things down now if we don't like what they're doing. Here's a bad situation. We just made it way worse. So sign this petition. This is not the answer to deal with issues of censorship on the internet, giving the government full control over censor. Why aren't libertarians and the right screaming about this as well? This is not a partisan issue, by the way. People of all types of political, and maybe they are, and I've just not seen it. So I don't want to I don't want to make assumptions here. But people of all political persuasions should be sounding the alarm about this. This is not the answer to issues of censorship on the internet. The answer is to designate things public utilities and have them abide by free speech laws. That's the answer. Not to give the government this overreaching authority to then just stamp social media platforms out if they do something that they're like, oh, well, you did this and this is in violation of whatever. You're done here. We have the authority to do that. It's not the answer. So you can go to this website again. It's actionnetwork.org/petition/censor the internet. And this is a campaign by Fight for the Future. And you can add your name to demand that this executive order not go through.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and